It's Friday, the 29th of September. My name is Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. And last July of this year, Ryan Graves, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, gave a hearing to Congress on the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon program, where he's trying to get pilot reports about UFOs to be taken seriously. Now, a lot of us pilots have been seeing lights in the northern Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean on some of our longer transatlantic flights. A lot of it looks like satellites. And on my most recent trip coming back from Sydney, Australia, we had an excellent display of these light phenomenons. And had Mr. Graves done just a little bit of homework, he could have easily figured out what these lights are. Let's check it out. Bright again, and it's fading away again. Flying back from Sydney, Australia on the 27th of September, acting as the relief pilot, because these trips are so long, we have 4 pilots, and so we take 2 breaks each leg. Each leg is like 15 hours long, so we're never more than 3.5 hours away from a nap. And during my breaks, I was able to get some pretty good pictures of this phenomenon. I was using this Google 6 phone, which has this pretty good night capability of taking photographs where you can see the stars. Here you can clearly see Orion. This is earlier in the trip, and you can clearly see the clouds ahead. So getting closer to Los Angeles at about 4 o'clock in the morning and about 500 miles south of Los Angeles, we'll show you that in a minute, the planet Venus rises over the horizon, and Venus is very bright. And in years past, pilots have been so bedazzled by the rising of Venus over the horizon, they thought it was an airplane coming right at them, and even went to attempt to avoid a collision with Venus because it looks like a bright headlight coming over the horizon. And when it pops over the horizon, there's a lot of distortion and odd, neat flickering colors that the planet presents. And then just to the left of Venus here is this first light that we see appearing very bright, flashing brightly, and then dimming off rather quickly. And it's not always just one light at a time. Sometimes 2 of these lights appear at nearly the same time and can be moving in different directions. Now here's what it can look like with just a cell phone video camera. The video camera doesn't have the same low light capability as the still camera does, but these flares can be so bright that they can be detected by the video camera. And so we'll be watching this flare up here. Here is the planet Venus right here. So we got a good idea of exactly where we're located in the night sky. And then it fades away pretty quick. So here's exactly where we are when we really start seeing this phenomenon take place. But it's not so much our location as it is the time. It's 11:09 UTC or Zulu time, which makes it about 4 o'clock in the morning, or about 2 hours before, maybe 2.5 hours before sunrise. And that's critical. So we're approaching 28 north, 125 west, and we're about 500 miles to the south of Los Angeles. We're heading about 030 degrees, and we're looking off to our right about 070 degrees, 080 degrees, out there between the planet Venus and the rising Big Dipper on the horizon at an altitude of 35,000 feet. Now, if we go to the Stellarium website, we'll download the app and show you greater detail here in a moment, but we back the date up to the 27th, right about sunrise. Here comes Venus rising here. We're heading about 030 degrees, just a little bit to the right of north. And right after Venus is Mercury, and of course right below Mercury is the Sun. So when Venus is here on the horizon, the Sun is located right down here, some 20 or 30 degrees just below the horizon, and directly above the Sun. That would put it just to the left of Venus and just to the right of the Big Dipper. And so that's what makes, it's this time and this location that makes this light phenomenon so prevalent right here in this location, because the Sun is reflecting from beyond, just over the horizon. Now, most of us are used to satellite observations where we'll see a light in the sky tracking a straight line across a large section of the sky. These lights are only seen in a small quadrant of the sky, directly above where the Sun's about to rise in 2.5 hours, and they also move in different directions. You'll see one moving to the right, then you'll see one moving to the left, and then you might see one falling straight down. And to some pilots, you might think, hey, look, these little lights are in a tight little orbit. Look, it shot one down. And here's what an example of what that can look like. This is Venus over here. Here's one light moving to the right, and then here appears a second light, and it's moving to the left. And so that's one of the phenomenons that can throw pilots off as to what in the heck are these lights. To date, Elon Musk's Starlink program has over 4,500 satellites set up in a constellation around the globe to give us internet access to remote locations so we can all watch cat videos and ball games out in the wilderness. But these satellites are in a variety of different orbits and planes. For example, that direction, that direction, that direction, that direction. So as you look onto the horizon, that's where you can see two Starlink satellites moving in two different directions, or even three different directions. If we download the Stellarium app and set the location to North 28, West 25, and then backdate the date and time, we can put ourselves right back where we were at the time of the sightings, of the time that I was able to take these pictures during my crew break. We can also set the altitude to 10,000 meters, or about 35,000 feet. Now, if we turn off the horizon, which is right about here, we can see Venus above the horizon, Mercury, and the Sun straight down here. And where we're seeing these lights is right above the Sun, below the horizon. Now, if we turn the horizon back on, here we are at 4:18 in the morning. Venus has just risen. The Sun is down here. And if we zoom in, this program will show you everything that's moving around in the night sky at this time. So all we got to do is find one of these lights that are moving, and this program will identify it. In fact, this program will identify everything in the night sky. Now here's an example of Starlink satellite 4639 heading directly towards Venus at 4:32:11 a.m. Let's look around and see if we can see something else moving. Here's Starlink 1067 also moving from right to left. Chasing the one we just observed. Now let's find one going from the other direction. Okay, here's a Starlink 1112 moving from right to left and downward. Here's another Starlink 3633 kind of following that orbit. Again, we're still here at 4:34:52 a.m. on the 27th. So within just a matter of minutes, there's plenty of satellite activity crisscrossing each other out here. And here's another Starlink, 2178 is the designator, moving from left to right and a little bit down at 4:31:17 a.m. What's this one moving to the left? Starlink 30103 moving from right to left and downward a little bit. Here's another one coming up right next. Looks like it's on a collision course. See if I can get my mouse to work here. Starlink 4639. So see the two crossing paths like that? That's all these different crazy orbits that the Starlinks are orbiting the Earth with. And as they fade in and out, as they pass directly over the sun, reflecting off of the bottom, it can look like they're in lights in an orbital pattern, but they are Starlink satellites. Here comes another one at 4:32:18 a.m. Just one after another. And again, because they're just passing over the sun, that's where we can see them, where they flare up in a bright light and then fade away pretty quickly. So they're only visible in this little cone directly over the top of the sun, which is about to rise in about 2 to 2.5 hours. Now, Scott Manley on the Scott Manley channel does an excellent job of explaining how these satellites get into orbit, and they release them on these racks. And this is those train of satellites that you see so often. The lower these satellites are to Earth, the easier they are to spot. And they start out in a fairly low orbit of about 380 kilometers or 200 miles above the Earth, and they raise them up to a higher orbit, or the final orbit, of about 550 kilometers or about 341 miles above the Earth. But they just deploy this rack of satellites and spit them out like a deck of cards. And the satellites have, they can either go in a knife edge sort of pattern with the solar panels. The whole satellite weighs about 500 pounds. Or they can go in a 90-degree angle with the satellite panels. There's the 90-degree angle. And they've got a little thruster on there, and they can move them around into the different orbits. There's the initial orbit, and then they bring them up to this orbit, and then they bring them up to the final orbit. And each time they raise them to a different orbital altitude, the precession of the orbit is such that depending on the altitude, each individual satellite will begin to precess into its own orbit. And pretty soon, you've covered the entire planet with a constellation of orbits, of satellites, 4,500 of these satellites, which come and go and they decay, and 5% of them are getting lost from time to time, or decaying orbit, or being replaced. So they got to constantly keep feeding the orbits. So when these satellites first start out in that initial deployment of a relatively low altitude, they form these trains, and this is my buddy aviation photographer Tim O'Brien, who likes capturing photos of these things at night. And maybe you've seen these train constellations flying across the sky. Eventually, they get spread out and moved up into their final orbit. So before Mr. Graves gets everybody all spooled up at Congress about UAPs, I think it's imperative that pilots educate themselves on this Starlink satellite phenomenon, particularly just before sunrise and just after sunset in those areas located just directly above where the sun has either set or is coming up. Then, once you understand this Starlink phenomenon, and by the way, you can take the app with you on your phone and you can use it in real time and identify immediately any object that's moving in the sky. But once you figure that out, then you can begin looking for the real UFOs. Thank you so much for your support, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here. Here it is again, nice and bright. It looks like it's in all. And there's another one right. That one's moving from right to left.